Hello and welcome to Disastrous History. Today we're going to talk about what might be one of the most horrifying and unsettling fire disasters in all of history that has largely been forgotten. The Six Flags Great Adventure Haunted Castle Fire of 1984. Now, the building involved was an amusement park attraction at Six Flags Great Adventure Park in Jackson Township, New Jersey. The attraction was essentially a haunted house. It was 17 semi-trailers all pushed together in a maze and connected by plywood and wood framing 2x4s. Each trailer was 8 feet tall, 8 feet wide, and 40 feet long. 15 of the 17 were regular covered trailers. 2 were converted flatbeds that had a rotating wood frame structure around it. The attraction was set up as you would expect a haunted house to be set up. You enter one doorway, then wander through a maze with strange twists and turns to disorient you as various decorations and actors jump out in unsuspecting areas to scare you. It was also purposely lit with low-level lights and one strobe light in an area to add to the ambiance and attempts to frighten those going through the attractions. It was originally built in 1979. It was leased from Tom's River Haunted House Company in 1979 for a temporary Halloween attraction. The management of the park did not expect it to do very well and more or less ignored it. But that first Halloween, it did it incredibly well, and by 1984, it had become the single largest show attraction since it opened in the park, and the decision was made to make it permanent. Well, permanent. Give you a quick walkthrough of the structure. You walk across a drawbridge over a moat right here. You enter in this direction, and you immediately turn to the right. Now, once inside, there are 2 separate mazes. One on the left, known as the blue side, and one on the right, known as the red side. Both are identical, just mirrored. When you enter, park workers guide you either left or right, depending on which side is open, or if both are open on particularly busy nights, one group will go left, one group will go right. Now, this night, there was only the right side open. So when you first walk in, it is very dim. You come through here, you go through this doorway. It is very dark with very dim lighting. It's a haunted house attraction, so it's supposed to be. Walking into the first section, immediately to your right is a mannequin rat lady right in here. That's meant to scare you as soon as you walk in. Up on your left, you go a little bit forward. Right in here was a butcher. This was an actor for the park that was dressed up as a butcher who was there to scare you. He guided you around this corner here into a coffin area. Now, this coffin area had a mannequin inside of it. Then you traveled back around, came down this direction. This whole time it is very dimly lit and very hard to see. You come around this direction, and this hunchback right here was another actor that scared you. You came through here, went up this direction, and then this phantom right here was another actor that was supposed to scare you as you came around. It was dressed as Phantom of the Opera. Both of these are accessible by this control room that's in the center of the actual haunted castle. And then you continue up through this direction to a dummy lady on a wheel that was a mannequin around the corner. And then right here is your very first emergency exit. So right in here, this was an emergency exit to be able to go out and go down this direction. When you come around this corner here, this whole room right here was the strobe room. This room was lit by one strobe light in the middle that was meant to be disorienting. So you would walk down this direction and then have an immediate right here. Now, real quick, we should talk about this emergency exit that's right here. It is has been fitted with panic hardware. This door has panic hardware on it, so all you have to do is push up against it and it will open. There is also a lighted exit sign here above the door to indicate your way out. And this is about 226 feet into the actual maze itself. So from the beginning to this door right here is about 226 feet. Now, one of the things that we need to talk about this strobe room before we move on is that strobe light was very disorienting for people. And because it was completely pitch black other than the strobe light, and there was a hard right turn here at the end, they put in a polyurethane foam pad right here on the wall that stretched the whole wall because people would get confused and run into the wall and hurt themselves. So they put a pad on the wall so that if you walked too close to it or if you bumped into it, it wouldn't hurt nearly as bad and you realized, oh, I need to turn and walk a different way. So you walk this direction, you go around the Frankenstein dummy, you go this direction around here and back up this way. This is a dungeon, a fake dungeon, and then this is a spider room. So there were two up here as you go through this way. There were two paper mache mannequins that were covered in spiders to make it look like people were covered in spiders. They had cobwebs draped all over the ceiling. They would plastic spiders all over the floor and all over the walls in this area. You come around this direction. This is your second exit door right here. It is also fitted with panic hardware and has an exit light above it. After that, you move into this cave area that's dark, and it has random paper mache and metal framed fake rocks on the ground that you basically have to walk around and figure your way out. After you make it through the caves, you come to this barrel. Now, earlier I talked about two of the rooms being flatbeds that were modified. So if you've ever been in a haunted house or like a carnival haunted house type thing, there's one that generally is a giant tube that rotates around the center, and you kind of have to gauge your way through it by kind of walking along the wall. It's to confuse and disorient you and all that. That's what this was. It was a giant rotating barrel on the back of a flatbed truck. So you went through this, and then you came out and exited this direction. It is a pretty straightforward travel through. There's no places that really get you caught. It's just confusing because it's meant to be disorienting. It's dark. It's supposed to be frightening because it is a haunted house. Inside the actual structure itself, there were no smoke detectors, there were no sprinklers, and there was no overall alarm system. The only potential fire safety there were in the butcher area, the phantom area, and the hunchback area were fire extinguishers. However, those fire extinguishers were often empty because people would get scared, steal them from the workers, and spray the workers with them. So oftentimes they were completely empty because they'd been used by guests who were scared. So those weren't there, other than there was the exit light and the panic hardware on the doors, the two emergency exits. But other than that, there was no fire safety equipment anywhere inside this entire structure. So every bit of this, so this to here, is one trailer. This right here, 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 one trailer. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 trailers. All of these were interconnected, and they were all interconnected via plywood that had gone through the whole area. So everything on the inside was plywood and then covered with fabric to make it dark, or painted black to make it dark with very minimal lighting. So as you break this up, you can see that there are 8 total trailers that have just been smashed together to make one big structure with sections cut out of each one to make it so that it is a maze. It's the same on this side. There's 8 on this side. And then the 17th, if you remember back to earlier, this is the 17th right here. This control room right in the middle was the 17th. And then the exterior was right here, was the actual haunted castle facade. It was basically nailed to the front of this structure that they had created out of 17 semi-trailers. You have to understand about this Frankenstein's monster of a structure is that it had never been inspected by the local fire marshal for a reason. They considered it to be a temporary structure, despite the fact it had been in place since 1979. It was considered a temporary structure because, and I am 100% serious here, it was on wheels. Because they didn't take any of the trailer's wheels off, they considered it a temporary structure, despite the fact that no one could have moved it without extensive construction and extensive deconstruction of the actual buildings or the trailers. It was still considered a temporary structure. And the fact that thousands upon thousands of people went through it every single day, it had been an issue. It was well known that plywood could burn. It was well known that trailers could burn, but because it was still on wheels, they called it a temporary structure. So that brings us to Friday, May 11th, 1984. That evening, the park was full of approximately 15,000 individuals with a line of waiting patrons at the entrance to the haunted castle. The workers had determined to only open one side of the haunted castle, the red side. At around 6:30 p.m., approximately 30 individuals were taking their turns inside the maze of the castle. It was just before 6:30 that two 14-year-old boys entered the haunted castle together. They made it through the first sections of the attraction before coming up to the strobe room. But there was a problem. The strobe light wasn't working. It was pitch black. Trying to figure out how to get through, one of the boys pulled a lighter from his pocket and lit it in order to see his way through. As he walked, he waved it back and forth in front of his face, but because the room was so darkened, he never saw the end wall coming at him. He bumped right into the polyurethane foam wall in front of him, and it ignited almost immediately. If you know anything about polyurethane foam, you know that once it was going, there was almost no stopping it. According to the other boy he was with, the boy attempted to put it out but failed and ran out the nearby fire exit. This is the official story from local fire investigators, which we will talk a little bit more later. At around the same time, 6:30 or so, around the corner from the area where the fire started, the employee working as the butcher smelled smoke. Curious as to the source, he walked around the way to the Phantom of the Opera section and saw heavy smoke traveling towards him. He ran back to the butcher area, went through the control room between the two halves of the attraction, and told the worker out front to stop letting guests in as there was a fire. He then re-entered the control room, called the Six Flags Great Adventure Park Fire Department at 6:35, and went out back where he observed heavy smoke and fire in the area of the emergency exit at the start of the strobe room. On the other side of the fire, an adult saw it and ran through the entire rest of the attraction to warn the employees there was a fire. One girl was in with four of her friends, and at first, they thought it was part of the attraction. It was dark and hazy and felt like it was supposed to be scaring them because it was kind of choking them. But they quickly realized that wasn't it, and the five of them sprinted through the rest of the attraction, realizing there was a fire behind them. Eventually, outside, they turned around and saw large flames shooting skyward from the thing that they were just in. One group of kids saw the fire early on and thought the illusion was fantastic and a part of the attraction before walking closer and realizing, oh, no, that's a real fire, and running out the door. A group of four had entered the building led by James Anderson. They made it to the end of the strom room and saw the fire in the polyurethane pad on the wall. He helped the three people he was with out the door, then ran the rest of the way through the attraction screaming fire and reported it to an employee at the exit. In the group just behind the group with James Anderson, there was a group of 9 kids, all teenagers. Suzette Elliott was one of them. She had been there on a school field trip with her best friend, Tina Genovese. There, they met 2 boys and began exploring the park with them. When waiting in line for the haunted castle, they met 5 other teenage boys and all decided to enter the haunted castle together. As they were traveling through, they made it to the Hunchback display where an actor jumped out and scared them. Entertained, they went around the corner and decided to hide in it all together to scare a group of people they could hear coming through the building behind them. They were there a few minutes when all of a sudden they heard someone scream fire from further in the building, followed by very thick smoke coming at them. The group became panicked and couldn't figure out which way to run before being knocked down and stepped down by others trying to escape the building. Suzette stood up and managed to feel along the wall towards the entrance, but soon became overwhelmed by breathing in smoke. She knelt down and couldn't continue on. About a minute later, laying on the floor of the amusement, she was dragged out by a park employee, likely dressed as Count Dracula. Meanwhile, back inside the strobe room, the fire was spreading very, very quickly. Essentially, everything inside was flammable. It would have reached significant temperatures very quickly, likely reaching full room involvement rather early on since all the walls and the ceiling were plywood and were covered with flammable fabric. If you didn't make it out in the initial stages of this fire, you weren't making it out. Unfortunately, that would be the case for all of Suzette's friends. One of them was found near where Suzette was pulled out, having managed to at least attempt to make it back towards the entrance. The other 7 were found huddled together in what was likely the same area where they had initially hid just a few minutes prior in an attempt to scare those behind them. The first captain from the fire department arrived on scene and pulled a hand line through the entrance. He made it 20 feet. The heat beat him back outside. Mutual aid departments were called at 6:41 p.m. They wouldn't arrive until 6:52 p.m. By that point, the entire attraction was fully involved. After the fire was declared contained around 7:40 p.m., the fire department performed a primary search and found no victims. The reason they found no victims is because the 8 teenagers that had died inside the building were burnt so badly, the fire department initially believed they were mannequins as part of the attraction meant to scare guests. It would take a couple more hours before they realized, no, those are actual people. Those 8 fatalities were 18-year-old Nicola Kaiser, 17-year-old Joseph Beiruti, 15-year-old Tina Genovese, 18-year-old Eric Rodriguez, 17-year-old Samuel Valentin, 17-year-old Lenny Ruiz, 17-year-old Jose Carrion, and 17-year-old Christopher Harrison. Okay, so real quick, let's go through the actual layout here and what happened in this fire. So, our overhead view we have here. So, this side back here, this is the back side of the structure. The entrance is right in here. You can see the haunted castle sign right here. So, the entrance is right in here. This side over here, right here, is the side that was open on the night of the fire. So, we enter here. And you'll kind of have to go along with it because there's a lot of damage here. So we're going to have to kind of make an idea. We can verify that this section right in here is the control room, right? Because it's right in the middle. You can see there's a gap right in here. The emergency exit would have been in this general vicinity. So you come in this direction. You go up. The butcher's right in this area. You go right. And then you go around this direction. You can see in the map up above my head. You can kind of follow along with the map. You go that direction. You go back this direction, right? And then you go a little jog. Whoops. You go a little jog. Then you do a little jog back. And then you go around and up, right? You go up this direction, and then you kind of crud across. Then you go up here, around, down, and then you enter. This would be the strobe room in general, right about here, right in this area right here. That's where we are currently at. Now, our initial area of origin is this back wall right here, because this is where the polyurethane foam was located. So you would walk down this strobe room right here, and this wall had a polyurethane foam pad on it because people continuously walked into it. So you've got your fire building right back here in this corner. Now, immediately, you're going to have fire spread around this corner and down this direction because this is all one connected right here. So this is all going to be plywood. You're also going to have thick smoke billowing down this direction. Now, one of the things I want to point out here is if you look right here on this wall, all of this area is almost completely consumed, right? There's a bunch of holes, but below it is still intact. So we had very hot upper level and not as hot lower level. Makes sense? Now, the thing that doesn't quite make sense about this area right here being the area of origin is this wall is still very intact, especially compared to all of this fire damage up in here, right? Because if you were to expect this to be the area of origin, which we don't really have anything to change, if you expect this to be the area of origin, you would expect this to be the most damaged area of the structure, especially with that polyurethane foam right there. It's going to burn very hot and very quickly. But right in here, we have a significant amount of damage. Now, the front portion of the building did collapse, so that's going to add to some of the damage depending on which way it fell. It looks like it fell almost straight down because you can see some of it here, you can see some of it here. This was a wooden framed facade, so this would have burned and then collapsed. Now, it's very possible that it collapsed somewhat in here, which took down some of these walls, because you can see right in here, right here, there is a lot of, it looks like it was 2x4 wall right there. Those are 2x4 studs. Can't quite tell. But your victims in this fire, the eight teenagers in this fire, were found in this area right here, and then one was found over in this area. Suzette was found just past this area in this general area and was pulled out this back door back here by one of the park workers. They went in through the control room and out the back. So inside this structure, we have our fire starting back in this corner. Fire spread's going to go this direction. Fire spread is going to go this direction. Our first witness to the fire is on this side right here, ran through the rest of this and out over here. Our second witness to the fire sees it right here, goes back out this direction and takes all of his friends out here and then runs past the fire, goes all the way out running, yelling fire. Suzette's group was somewhere in this area, hiding around a corner in an attempt to scare people that were coming up through this direction. We don't know exactly where in this corner. If you look at the map above me, you will see there are 8 crosses on the map where the victims were located after the fire. You can see they're all kind of in that little hallway, and then there's one around the corner that managed to follow Suzette partially the way out. We don't know exactly where they were. We know that they didn't, from Suzette's account, we know they didn't get far enough to actually see the fire. They saw the smoke coming down, which makes sense because it would have gone around, back up, and down towards them this direction. But we don't know exactly where they were. We just know where they were found. And looking at the map and realizing that they were there in an attempt to scare the people behind them, they were likely just past that hunchback display that's just below where their bodies were found. They were probably hiding around that corner right there in an attempt to scare them. So they didn't make it very far from where they were at all once this fire really got going. But it's interesting that this portion right here, the roof is completely consumed, and we still have some level left, but we have a lot of damage inside. This right here is interesting. I don't really have a good explanation as to why this is so damaged compared to the rest of it, unless it is from the facade collapsing. You would expect something similar-ish to this, because there's an air conditioning unit, as you can see right here. There's an air conditioning unit there. You can see there were some air conditioning units built into the top of the structure. So one of the things that may have potentially helped with the spread of this fire is that air conditioning unit going along and pushing some of the oxygen into it and pushing it towards where these teenagers were located, and also burning in this area a little bit more. I can't tell for certain because there aren't very many good photos of the aftermath of this fire, but this is one of the best one that gives you a really good layout of what this actually looked like. Now, after the fire, the amusement park insisted they had done nothing wrong and the ride was up to code, which I guess if you want to be incredibly technical about it, they didn't, because Jackson Township had ruled that it was a temporary structure and therefore did not need to be inspected or apparently have any fire safety whatsoever. Despite that, Six Flags Great Adventure, Six Flags, the general manager at the time of the fire, and the general manager that had been there before the fire were charged with aggravated manslaughter for recklessly causing the deaths under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life. At the first hearing for the case, attorneys for the defense asked the judge to require the prosecution to detail what the defendants had done to fit the charge. The judge replied, and this is a direct quote, "They aren't charging that you did anything. They're charging that you did nothing." Multiple safety consultants for Six Flags Park had recommended they install sprinklers and smoke detectors in the building. In 1979, the company had in fact installed smoke detectors for one season after a safety inspector recommended it, but they were vandalized, so they elected not to reinstall them. Their solution for not having them, which they claimed was just as good as a smoke detector, was to have an employee randomly walk through the attraction every once in a while to check. Their job as the rover was to watch for rowdy guests, clean up trash, and check for fires. At the time of the fire, the rover was outside the building picking up trash around the area, which, you may notice, is no way to find a fire. Park officials had also been told in 1979, when the structure was built, that the materials used inside were fireproof, as the contract for the construction stated fireproof materials had to be used whenever possible. In this case, whenever possible meant literally not possible at all, because almost none of this was fireproof. Sprinklers had also been recommended by the safety inspector. Six Flags rejected it as too expensive. Employees regularly complained because guests would light matches and lighters inside to be able to see and would ask for smoke detectors or sprinklers, but were told by management that any money spent to put in a sprinkler system for the temporary structure would take away from the money to build the permanent structure. They also said that the fire extinguishers would also regularly be empty because guests would steal them and spray their friends. The extinguishers would often sit empty for months at a time because management didn't want to pay to refill them. The defense in this case for Six Flags and Great Adventure Park because the two people that were actually charged pled guilty so they could receive community service. So it was only the two corporations that went on trial. The defense for the two corporations used two separate defenses to make their case. The first was that Jackson Township didn't tell them to install any safety features, so they didn't have to, which is technically accurate, but makes them terrible people. Anyone with a semi-functioning set of eyes could tell you it was a death trap, especially with numerous reports of guests lighting matches and lighters inside to see. The other defense is more simple, but at the same time, way more complicated. The defense stated that the fire was arson, and because it was arson, nothing they could have done would have prevented the deaths. Now, I'm going to go into detail, but right off the bat, that is demonstrably false. But let's dive into their claims supporting this because they had several. The first claim is that sprinklers would have done nothing to prevent this from happening. The man who testified on behalf of the defense was Chester Shermer, who was at the time the chairman of the National Fire Protection Association. Yes, that NFPA. Basically, his assertion was that the sprinklers would have saved property, but not lives. He also stated that smoke detectors wouldn't have helped either because, and this is a direct quote, the teenagers were warned by shouts just after the blaze started, but were still unable to escape, end quote. Shouting in a haunted house attraction is incredibly common. Understanding what the shouts are saying and if they should be worrisome is also not something you are fully expecting inside a haunted house that has actors jumping out and yelling to scare people. That's kind of the entire point of a haunted house. There were multiple people that yelled fire, but multiple groups that thought the fire was part of the actual attraction. So clearly just yelling fire inside a building is not enough to tell people, hey, you need to get out, there's a fire. He also said that sprinklers wouldn't help because the system used for the building would be a dry system and it would take too long for water to flow through the system. So, quick explanation on sprinkler systems. There are wet systems and dry systems. Wet systems always have water in the pipes. There is always water immediately available if a sprinkler activates. These are more or less standard systems, so when one sprinkler activates, it flows immediately. Dry systems are more uncommon and are often used for exterior uses, areas that are not temperature controlled, and places where an accidental water leak would be catastrophic. Essentially, how a dry system works is there is a constant air pressure in the system that is higher than the water pressure and holds the valve closed. If you look at this diagram here, this red area right here, up here, this is all air. There is a valve right here that the air pressure inside this red area is higher than the water pressure on this blue side, right? So if one of these sprinklers, wherever it is, activates, the air pressure will be pushed out, will go out through the actual sprinkler head. The water pressure will become greater than the air pressure inside the sprinkler system, and water will flow through the system. His statement was essentially that because the majority of this haunted castle was an exterior system, it's unlikely that they would want to install a wet system inside the actual structure itself and have to go through all of their decorations. They would likely run the sprinkler pipes on the upper side of the trailers, then drop down through. So his argument is that because it would likely be a dry pipe system to prevent freezing in the winter and all of that, it would have taken time for the water to go from the riser over here, the sprinkler to activate, all of the air pressure to go out, and then the water that came from the riser likely over in this area come up and the water to come out. He's arguing that it would take too long for the water to get here to have any effect on being able to get these teenagers out before they died, which is a stretch at best because the water's not instantaneously going to be on there. No one is arguing that. But generally, when you have a dry pipe system, you have activation and then you have a delay between, 30 to 60 seconds, depending on how far away that particular sprinkler is from the actual riser. So let's say there's a 30-second, let's say the fire starts, there's a 30-second delay before it actually activates the sprinkler. Then let's just give it a minute. Let's say it's a 60-second water run from wherever the riser is with the water in it to the actual sprinkler system itself. We are at a minute and a half. Now, fire can spread a lot in a minute and a half. But I am hard-pressed to believe that even putting a little bit of water on this system on this fire in a minute and a half would have done nothing because it's unlikely that there would only be one sprinkler in each area. I haven't done the actual calculations to figure out how many exact sprinklers there were, but my guess was be that they would put two on each end, one on each end of the trailer. So one covering here, one covering here. So even if we have a minute and a half delay before the water gets there, this first sprinkler activates. Likely by that time, the second sprinkler for the up would have activated in this trailer. So now you have two pipes, two sprinklers flowing water instead of just one. And I find it difficult, if not impossible, to believe that would have had no effect on the survivability of this fire. Seems like somebody may have been told to give an answer that they didn't necessarily believe in, because they're over here. We still have a long stretch before this smoke, even if it is a lot, we still have a long stretch before this smoke has completely taken over those 8 teenagers. It is important to note that sprinklers have not and have never been designed to extinguish fires. They are there to make sure the fire is contained to an area until the fire department can get there to extinguish it. They have never been designed to put out a fire. There is some leeway in that with deluge systems for sprinklers, but that's a whole different discussion. Generally, for the most part, 99% of the time, they are not there to extinguish fires. And I will note that this particular testimony by the chairman of the National Fire Protection Association was not popular with those in the NFPA. They were very unhappy with him saying that, number one, they didn't need smoke detectors, and number two, that a sprinkler system would have done nothing for this fire. Many people called on him to be removed as chairman or resign. Neither of those happened, but it was called for, and they were very unhappy about it. Now, the other portion of their claim that this was arson was that it was arson in the first place. And they did have someone attempt to back that up. Basically, the claim is that the fire was intentionally set by the previously mentioned 14-year-old boy, and he used some kind of flammable liquid to do it. Now, there are a number of issues with this, but let's get into this first claim. The pathologist used by the defense as a witness, Dr. Michael Baden, was at the time the deputy chief medical examiner of New York City and stated that the victims, quote, had exceptionally high quantities of benzene in their blood. Benzene is not usually found in fire victims. It could indicate some sinister reason for the fire, end quote. He said that the levels they found in their blood were 10 times higher than usual fire victims. This is false, like factually false. Benzene is regularly found in the blood of fire victims. In fact, a study done by the Department of Forensic Medicine at Kumamoto University in Japan in 2023 studied the correlation between different volatile hydrocarbons found in the blood of victims. In victims who died in 3 separate types of fires, they analyzed the different amounts of hydrocarbons found in the bloodstream. Kerosene fires resulted in higher levels of xylene, gasoline fires resulted in higher levels of toluene, and normal construction fires, they found high levels of benzene. In those normal construction fires, the range of benzene they found was 0.2 milligrams per liter to 2.5 milligrams per liter. The range of benzene levels found in the blood of the 8 teenagers that died in this fire was 0.7 milligrams per liter to 2.6 milligrams per liter, which are all within the reasonable range of what you would expect from a normal construction fire. But in addition to that, polyurethane foam releases a significant amount of benzene as it burns. Since that was a major part of this ignition scenario for this fire, it would be expected there would be a higher level of benzene in the blood of the victims. Because at the time that the actual polyurethane foam was burning, they would have been still standing and still breathing. So when things burn, the main fuel ignited and burning at the time is what's going to produce the smoke, right? So since it is early on in the fire, they are still alive, they are still standing. The only thing currently burning is mostly the polyurethane foam. All of the smoke that they are breathing in is coming from that polyurethane foam. So right up until those 8 teenagers passed out and died, they would be breathing in the smoke of what the fuel was burning, which was the foam. So up until the point that they passed out and were no longer breathing, they are no longer going to be breathing in any more smoke. So whatever was first burning is going to be more present in their bloodstream. because they were alive and still breathing. But it wasn't just that he said the benzene being present was unusual. He also said that benzene in amounts large enough to accelerate a fire would be most common in industrial solvents or paint removers. Now, one more point before I move on. There was another pathologist that testified in this trial against the defense for the prosecution that said that they didn't normally test bloodstreams for benzene up until recently, and all of the recent fire victims that he had tested in normal fires had benzene in their blood. So even in 1984, they knew that benzene showed up in blood. They just hadn't been testing for it. So they did this time, and somebody that wasn't testing for it came in and said that's unusual, and then made it seem like it was arson. And he also said that the amount large enough to accelerate a fire would be most common in industrial solvents or paint removers. Now, they are trying to pin this fire on a 14-year-old boy intentionally setting it. So their argument is a 14-year-old boy snuck industrial solvent or paint remover into the haunted house, doused the place with it, lit it, then got back out without anyone seeing him aside from the other 14-year-old boy he was with. It only takes anywhere from 3 to 8 minutes to get through the entire haunted house. There was also a scare actor right at the only two places he could have entered that wasn't the main door. It was an improbable scenario at best. Now, as best I can tell, no flammable liquid samples were taken from inside the building, which is annoying but not shocking since fire investigators said they didn't find any pour patterns, which in 1984 was basically a smoking gun for arson, despite the fact that's not what it actually is at all. To explain pour patterns really quick, it's where you look at the ground and there's like a pool burn pattern on the ground. Back in the late 70s, 80s, and early 90s, it was very common for fire investigators to find that kind of pool burn on the floor and assume that someone had poured some type of flammable liquid there as a trailer and initially rule it arson. We know now that there are a number of different reasons why that pattern could be there. Primarily, it's because a lot of where these quote-unquote pour patterns and trailers were at was in the middle of hallways. And if you regularly walk down a hallway, you generally walk down the middle of it. And if it's carpeted, walking regularly down the middle of it will degrade the carpet as you walk by. So if the fire is bad enough and reaches flashover, then the initial part that's going to burn is that frayed and thin area of the carpet, which is going to leave a burn pattern that looks like a trailer, but it's actually just where you've been walking regularly the entire time you've lived in your house. But they didn't find any pour patterns in this particular structure, so they didn't take any samples to determine if there was any flammable liquids used at all, which usually with a fatality fire, you always take fire samples just in case. It's usually good practice that if you have a fatality, you should take at least 5 samples. Whether or not you get them tested or not is up for debate, but generally you take fire samples. So that was unfortunate. And then along with saying that this was arson, of which they provided, as we've shown, exactly zero evidence of, they also claimed that because it was arson, they couldn't plan fire safety around it, which this is a point that still gets brought up a lot to this day. Whenever there is a major fire and is either reported or suspected as being arson, people immediately write off anything to do with it and essentially say the fire was always going to be large, spread quickly, and be impossible to fight. It happened when people believed the Lahaina fire was arson. It happened with the Palisades fire. It happened with the Notre Dame fire in 2019. But that isn't true. The only thing that arson does is maybe provide more initial fuels to the initial fire. But once the fire moves past that initial first fuel ignited, it is the same as any other fire. Arson only impacts the first fuel ignited. It has no bearing on the rest of the fire. It is simply the circumstances of how fuel and ignition source came together. Smoke detectors still would have alerted guests in the structure. Sprinklers still would have provided at least some impedance to the fire spreading. Arsons are not magically incredibly powerful fires that burn everything they touch. They are normal fires that have a little help getting going sometimes. They are not magical. They do not make a fire more difficult to fight. They do not make a fire spread any faster once it's moved past that initial ignition source. It is literally the exact same as any other fire, just changes how it starts. Really, the defense here was reaching for anything that would make their client not liable for anything, and I guess they were successful because both companies were found not guilty of the charges, specifically because township officials had told them they didn't need fire safety or permits or sprinklers because it was a temporary structure because it was still on wheels. I really want to hammer that home. It was a temporary structure because they didn't take the wheels off the trailers. That is literally the only reason, which sucks, but I guess is technically accurate. But while we are on the topic of arson and dealing with the outfall of this, I want to go into the details of the alleged cause of this fire. So the boy who reported the other boy for running into the foam was 14. He is the only person alleged to have seen this happen. He is the only person who has any witness to this other boy. He does not know his name, doesn't know what he looks like, had never seen him before, all of that. And now, in my time as a fire investigator, I dealt with several teenagers who had accidentally set fires. The initial story was always, well, my friend did it. What's your friend's name? I don't know. I just met him. Where did you meet them? Oh, around. How long have you known them? Just today. Where did they go? They ran off. Every single time. Now, to get around this, you have to get on their level and talk to them and really walk them through what you're seeing with the fire, because then you start to get the real story. Once they start to recognize that their story's falling apart as you show them the evidence and what you're seeing and what's going on, then they'll start to come around and tell you the actual story. But I'm guessing that the investigators for this case absolutely did not do that, because for a number of reasons. Number one, it's a kid. And this is a fatal fire, and he was probably scared to death. So they probably asked him some questions. He said, oh, some random kid I saw did it, ran away. They didn't really want to push into it. And also, they probably came at it like cops. And if there's anything teenagers hate more than anything, it's talking to cops. So he stuck to his story, and nobody questioned it. But I am willing to bet almost anything that there was no other kid. Now, do I think he intentionally said it? No, not really. But I'm guessing he went in alone, got stuck in the dark and got scared, took out a lighter and lit it, bumped into the wall, set it on fire, tried to put it out, couldn't, and then ran away. And part of my reasoning for that is he mentioned in his story. So when he's telling the story, every time he mentioned it, he mentioned that the other boy tried to put the fire out before he ran away. And that's an interesting detail to include when you don't know the other person at all and have zero idea who they are. You have no way of telling who this person is. You have no way of identifying this other kid. But you are going to stick to, he tried to do the right thing before running away, but I don't know who he is. It really feels like if he was questioned in the right way, he would have answered, I did it on accident. I got scared and ran away. I think that's really what actually happened here, is that he did it on accident. He got scared. He got stuck in the dark because he tried to do it bravely on his own, maybe trying to impress his friends, maybe trying to impress a girl. Who knows? Got scared in the dark, lit his lighter, ran into it, tried to put it out, couldn't, ran away. It's what I think happened here. He's an early teenage kid. Stupid things happen, and unfortunately, this was a massively tragic accident. Now, this fire caused massive changes in fire codes. In the aftermath, Six Flags paid for massive upgrades to their parks, including smoke detectors and sprinklers throughout. All haunted house attractions in New Jersey were shut down for code inspections and upgrades. It changed amusement park fire safety everywhere in the U.S., basically. Essentially everywhere had to be shut down and analyzed to make sure they didn't have their own haunted castle. Every state was terrified of having this particular thing happen because no amusement park wants to be the place where 8 teenagers died, because teenagers are a big portion of your clientele if you're an amusement park. So you don't want to have schools stop bringing teenagers because they're afraid they're going to get killed, right? That's just not a thing. So they immediately, everywhere, went into damage control mode. What are our worst rides? What are our least safe rides? How can we make them safer? What investments do we need to make right now? Because no one wants this to happen to us, because this is a PR nightmare. It almost caused Six Flags Great Adventure to shut down in 1989 because the rumors that flew out of this particular fire, that they had chained doors shut, that they trapped the kids in there on purpose, that blah, 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 that it was done for insurance money, flew forever and absolutely tanked Six Flags Great Adventure's reputation for a long time. But eventually, it did come back, and Six Flags Great Adventure is still open in New Jersey. Now, not long after the fire, the haunted castle was torn down. It was completely destroyed and torn down. And now, the area where the haunted castle used to be is now generally the area where the Dark Knight coaster is. It is in an area actually behind the Dark Knight coaster that is now kind of an area that has been blocked off from guests. There is no memorial anywhere in Six Flags Great Adventure Park for the 8 teenagers that died. There is no idea that there had been a catastrophic fatality fire in this entire park anywhere on the grounds. If you go there now, you would have no idea that one of the most essential amusement park safety fires ever happened in this area. And so that is the Six Flags Great Adventure Fire of 1984. As always, I appreciate you guys for being here and watching the whole thing. I hope you stick around, like, subscribe, comment, all those fun things. As always, stay safe and remember to check your smoke detector batteries.